Let's go ahead and get started. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you today Father Nathan Castle. I had the distinct honor of meeting him virtually last year. I was on a panel for IANDS, and he was part of my panel. And so we liaised with the other members of the panel a couple of times, and I was able to sort of shepherd him through that presentation. So I know his stuff very well, and it's a very thrilling subject. So without further ado, let me go ahead then and hand this over to Father Nathan. After his talk, I may jump in and ask some questions, but we will have a Q&A when he finishes. We'll be running possibly till 4 o'clock, no later than that. So please get your questions ready. And you can ask them in person, just raise your hand, or you can type them in the chat. All right, take it away, Father Nathan.
Okay, thank you, Angie. And Angie and I had a little pre-meeting just in the last half hour. I encouraged her to interject a question or two along the line. You know, I asked her, am I a keynote speaker standing at a podium, addressing a room, or am I an interviewee? I'm on a lot of podcasts, so I'm quite used to being interviewed. And I encourage Angie to sometimes be the interviewer, just jump in and ask a question if something strikes her. And we'll certainly leave at least a half an hour. I think, Angie, I'm probably inclined to leave more than that for Q&A, but we'll see how it goes. What Angie's encouraged me to do is to both explain in an overview fashion the work that I do in helping souls cross, and give a little background on that. And then in the two books, there are a total of 26 stories that are told, and so I'm going to go into some of those. And if any of you have read the books or are reading them like you, Maureen, if there's anybody that you'd like to hear about, I'd be happy to move in that direction. That's sort of my style as a speaker, is to have a general overview of what I'm going to do, but then be ready to move about rather freely. So I'm grateful that you've made the commitment to be here today. I found that I've been to 2 in-person IANDS conventions, the one that was in Metro Seattle a few years ago, and then the one that was in King of Prussia, north of Philadelphia, and then of course the one that we did virtually where Angie and I worked together. And I'm excited because in the previous ones I've been a panelist where you get 13 to 15 minutes to give a sort of an infomercial for whatever it is you have to say. But this time I'm a breakout speaker with a full hour in the Salt Lake City convention. Well, the long and the short of it is I'm a Catholic priest, and I have been for almost 37 years. I'm in the Dominican order. I've been a Dominican for about 42 years, so I'm 66 now. I've been primarily a campus minister most of my career. I was at Arizona State University for 12. I'm currently on the campus of the University of Arizona in Tucson, where I'm in residence, and I'm helping out this weekend. Actually, we just graduated, and so the students are gone. It's sort of it's a happy time for people that work in academia and in campus ministry, because as much as we love students, we also love it when they leave. It's just a kind of a feeling of a big exhale and an opportunity to catch your breath and maybe go on to some summer projects. I've spent 12 years at Arizona State, 5 years at UC Riverside, and 7 at Stanford University in campus ministry. So I've been a busy man, and I love being a religious leader in a context where questions are answered, and we're not just providing pat answers, but we're exploring what we believe is true. Dominicans in particular are an order that truth is our motto. And so seeking out what we believe to be true is something that is kind of in our bloodstream. Anyway, about 25 years ago, I was minding my business. Once upon a time, I was on a retreat in northern Arizona with a group of adult folk, and we're in these cabins and stuff, and I was asleep. And about somewhere along 3 o'clock in the morning, I had a dream that began with my own psychobabble, my own dream material. I was finishing a round of golf. I was playing with another priest friend. And as we finished our round, we went into the 19th hole, what golfers call the bar. So we walked into the bar, and we walked into a silent auction. Now, I've run nonprofits most of my life, so fundraising is part and parcel of it. So I walked into a fundraiser in progress. If you've been to a silent auction, you know, they're mostly donated objects or things that are set out, and there's some sort of sheet where you bid on it. You'll pay $25 for this, and if you want it bad enough, you have to keep checking. Well, they see that nobody else outbids you. I was looking across the way, and on the wall, there was a piece of framed art that was so ghastly. I turned to my partner and said, look at that god-awful thing. Who in the world would donate that to a charity? They ought to be ashamed. But it was, whatever it was so horrible that I felt like I needed to see it more clearly, the way that we catch ourselves gawking at wrecks on the freeway. You know, you really ought not stare at that, but something about it is compelling. And I moved toward it, and it moved toward me, and that's where things changed. I wasn't just in my own dreamscape anymore. I was in somebody else's story. We didn't have, 25 years ago, we didn't have televisions on walls, but that's what it was like. I walked toward it, it moved towards me, and then inside the frame, a little video played out, and it was a young man, maybe 20 years old. He was sitting on the radiator of a car from the late 50s, maybe early 60s, the kind with fins and lots of chrome. He hadn't been in a wreck, but he was on fire, sitting on an engine with his facing away from the vehicle. And I was looking right at him, and he was screaming at somebody outside the picture frame and dying, burning to death. And I woke up. Well, if I've explained it well, the first part of it was clearly my own dream material. And the second part of it was what I call a contact dream. It was somebody else's material moving into my awareness. And I sat up from it, and I immediately said a prayer and directed my attention to this person. I don't know who you are. My name is Nathan. You've just showed me this scene. I will do the best I can to help you. I'll be back in touch as soon as I know what to do. So I went back to sleep. I said a prayer to just bless the guy. And it reminded me of the experience that many ministers have, especially Catholic clergy. We have to take our turn, if we live near a hospital, having the pager. And if it's Tuesday, it's your pager night. And you have to have the pager on the nightstand. And in case there's an emergency call at the hospital for a priest, you're the one answering it. So you might be in a deep sleep, and in the middle of the night, the pager goes off, and you suddenly have to rouse yourself and talk to the person at the nurse's station who's giving you a patient's name, circumstance, room number, and you're to get there as fast as you can. Well, that's what it felt like. I felt like I was called into service that night with this young man burning. So in the morning, I was on retreat. And when you're on retreat, there's always early risers. Some of them go running. Which, you'll never find me doing that, but I might be around the runners. I'll be near the coffee. And I went near the coffee, and I found a friend of mine who I knew had spiritual gifts because I had prayed with her before. And I thought, you probably could help me with this. So we got together, and I just said to her, could we find a quiet moment at a break and go into prayer and see what we can do about this, whatever this is. So we did that. We got still, and I never move into that realm without protection. I like to tell people I don't pick up hitchhikers here or hereafter. And I'm from the Catholic Christian tradition. I use St. Michael the Archangel. I use Holy Mary and St. Joseph, St. Benedict, St. Dominic, the founder of my order, and different ones. But I imagine like a holy huddle of beings of light, making sure that we're unmolested by anything that might try to cause us harm. Um, we went into prayer and got still, and my friend said, whoever this man is, he really wants to talk to you. Would it be okay if I let him? Right. This allowing somebody to borrow your voice is commonly called channeling. In the Roman Catholic Church, that's an absolutely radioactive word. And so I don't, if I'm going to live in this context and try to stay a Catholic priest in good standing, I don't use that word to describe myself anyway. And there's not much I can do about that. You know, how people perceive you, they're going to do what they do. But anyway, we were protected, and I said, sure, go ahead. And the young man, this story is told in detail in the first of the two Afterlife Interrupted books. His name was Ray, and we had not done this before, but Ray spoke and said, who the hell does he think he is, taking me just when my life was getting good? And we learned that he was a 20-year-old at the time of his death. He had a child that was a year and a half old. He and a buddy had a small business in a detached garage that where they repaired cars. The day of his death, they were both wearing greasy clothes. They had just had Sunday dinner. They'd had some alcohol. They got into some sort of an argument and took it outside, and were arguing with each other when Ray caught fire. He doesn't even know how, but he was wearing greasy clothes, and that somehow contributed to it. In any event, he died in a fire. And he had been told that the reason that people die at all is because God takes them. Angie, you were asking earlier what kind of feedback I get from people, like through my website. And some of it is this kind of thing. They're cosmological questions about, why does anybody die anyway? Or why did they die at a certain moment and not another moment? And there are people that believe in reincarnation, and off ramps about, you had some say about when your death might occur and so on. Well, there's all kind of cosmologies about that. But this man had been taught as a child that people die because God takes them, and how dare he? Who the hell does he think he is? So we asked him, like, I'm assuming that I'm not the only person here who does counseling. Angie, you do, don't you? Isn't one of your standard questions, how can I help you? What is it you want? Then maybe I can help you get there. We asked him, what is it you want? And he said, my wife, she's an old woman now, because he had died 40 years earlier, and he'd kept an eye on her for 40 years. Apparently we can do that if that's really what we want to do. And he said, she's an old woman now. She married again. She married up. She married a lawyer, and she moved to South Carolina. But now she's got cancer, and she's going to die. And I want to greet her when she comes, but I can't the way I am. We said, okay, well, that's a really good answer, Ray. You gave us a good description of what it is you want. Now we need to figure out how we can help you. And we'd not done this before. And it takes time. And we were on a retreat where we were on a break. So we only had a brief amount of time to get a little orientation. And we said, no, we've got to go, Ray, but we're going to come back. So get ready. We'll come back and ask for you. So a week later, we did that. We worked with him a little bit about, apparently he had created an environment for himself upon his death where he was in isolation because he wanted that. He was mad at the world, and he didn't want anybody to be around him. So apparently we were learning, we figured, well, that must be one of the ways it works. If you want to be alone, well, then you get to do that mostly, but not absolutely. I don't believe the universe allows for absolute isolation. I think we're too embedded in each other somehow, the way it all works. So he had he had a guardian with him, but he wouldn't allow his guardian to do much of anything except be over there, on the edge of whatever it was he created. Over time, we asked him more questions, and at one point we figured, well, he told us he hadn't been anywhere or done anything since he died, except watch his wife. And we said, well, now it seems like you want to move, but you haven't moved in a long time. So it seems like we ought to get you up and moving a bit. Could we try out, would there be anybody that you'd be willing to allow near you? He had mentioned that his mother I asked him, how did you even know there was a God? And he said, my mom, she used to make me kneel next to my bed, and she'd beat me while I prayed. So I thought, well, maybe mom wouldn't be the best person to meet up with right out of the gate. What about your dad? And you never mentioned him. And he said, well, he died when I was 10. I was kind of afraid of him. He died in the war. And I said, Vietnam? He said, no, Korea. And I said, well, of course, you died in 1960. Vietnam hadn't happened yet. But then, Angie, maybe you use this technique with counselees. When people kind of go dark, you go light, say, okay, Ray, well, tell me, what was the happiest moment you and your dad ever had? Can you think of a time when you and he were happy together? And he said, yeah, one time we went and looked at cars. And so I said, well, what about, I don't know how it works, Ray, but would you be willing to try it? What if we asked him to come and visit you, but not come very close? What if he came just where you could see him, but not very close, and you could decide whether to invite him closer? And I said, when I'm a little bit afraid, I want to stay near the door, or I limit the amount of time that somebody can be near me. There's a ways to do that. And he said, yeah, I could do that. So we said, well, we just said a prayer, said, God, would you help Ray's dad come and visit him? And I remember very clearly, it took about 5 to 10 seconds. And he said, well, looky there. And I said, I can't see what you're seeing. You're going to have to describe it. And he said, well, it's my dad. And I said, well, does he look scary to you? Do you think you're being tricked? No, it's just my dad. I said, well, do you think you're safe to go where he would take you, just for a walk or something, just to get move about a bit? And he said, yeah, I think I could do that. And I said, okay, well, we're going to pause right now. We're going to go back to what we were doing, and we'll meet up with you in a few days. And we did that. Over time, I felt like getting to know him, he was a 20-year-old guy with a kind of arrogant affect, an angry, arrogant affect. And I just said, Ray, I think I know what might be the problem, but I don't think you're going to like it. And he said, what? And I said, well, it's just that when you talk about your wife, you act like a caveman. I get the image of you grabbing her by the hair and dragging her into your cave, and now let's break this down. She's in her 60s now. You've been gone for 40 years. She's loved lots of other people. Her parents have probably died. You're important because you were only one of two spouses, and you're the only dead husband, and you're the only person she had a child with. So you're absolutely important to her. But do you have to be the whole show? I think she would probably be greeted by other people. We're all IANDS members. We're used to hearing people's stories of being greeted by relatives or, sometimes groups and stuff. And I just thought, well, you're probably not going to be the only one. Can you imagine yourself being one of a very small but important group of people in her life and just chill a little? Could you just be a gentleman and not so much of a caveman? Well, he didn't like it, and he grumbled. And I said, and remember, you don't have to listen to us. You're free to leave anytime you please, but you did ask for our help. And this is what I'm offering. So anyway, we left it at that. And then we came back again, maybe a week later. And in that encounter, we just asked him how he was doing. And what's new, Ray? And he said, big news, my wife passed. I said, oh, well, tell us about that. And he said, well, it was like you said. I was there, but I wasn't the only one. There were a few of us. And he said, you would have been proud of me. I was a perfect gentleman. And I said, well, terrific, Ray. You had it in you all along. All we were trying to do was help you out. And it sounds like you figured out what you needed to do. He said, yeah, I got to be with her and I greeted her. And that's what you helped me do. I said, well, then, Ray, it sounds like our job's finished. You needed a specific thing and we helped you do it. It's probably time for us for you to move along and for us to go on about our business. But I said, he felt like a friend by that time that you were saying goodbye to until God only knows when. And I said, Ray, now that you have figured out how to be an afterlife greeter for your wife, I wonder if you would keep an eye on me the way that you kept an eye on her. And when it's my time to pass, would you mind being a part of the welcoming party? And I remember very clearly, he was very sweet. He said, why, sir, I'd be most honored. Just look for the perfect gentleman. And yeah, so that happened now about 25 years ago, and I'm still healthy and breathing on this side of the divide. But I anticipate that when it comes time for me to leave the body, that I'm going to be greeted by the perfect gentleman.
I have a feeling that a lot of the souls that you've helped will rally round and be waiting for you with balloons.
I would love that. I would love that.
Wouldn't
You,
be surprised.
because you do counseling, don't you sometimes, I mean, within professional boundaries, don't you just sometimes love the people that you're helping? And then other times there might be people where it's really more functional. You have, you know, some sort of affection or affinity or respect or something or other, but sometimes people just get in your heart and stay there. And then again, within professional bounds, you figure out what that might mean. But anyway, he's one that I've thought of him as an afterlife friend ever since.
So let me ask you, this communication, just remind us how this was actually taking place.
Beautiful. That's a perfect question. We were just figuring it out. So the dream comes, they come about once a week. I keep a journal on the nightstand to be able to write down the dream before it dissolves. Any of us who have done dream journaling or pay attention to our dreams, you know, you need to get it down quickly because it has a way of, you know, dissolving, especially detailed. So I keep a journal on the nightstand in case I have, I call it not having a dream, but receiving a dream. I have a dream about my own psyche. I receive a dream about someone else's material. So about once a week, I receive a dream, I write it down. I immediately talk to that person in prayer and just say, I've just done the best I can to write down what you just showed me. Soon I'll be with a prayer partner. I get with somebody. I have a lot of different prayer partners. We schedule an appointment. During the pandemic, most of them have been on Zoom, which works just fine for doing this. I'd prefer to be in person, but the pandemic, you know, made that difficult for all of us. But we get together. We do an opening prayer. Again, it's a Christian and Catholic prayer, but I believe Catholic means universal to begin with, and it doesn't need to be overblown with a lot of sectarian stuff, but it's the tradition I've been raised in and the one that I know. So I pray within my tradition. I make sure that we're safe from anything that would disturb. And then we do any of you know the phrase Lectio Divina? Does that mean anything to you?
I'm getting some nods.
Yeah. Lectio Divina is a style of meditation that uses a sacred text, or it could be a poem or something. I'm used to it being some scripture text. And what you can do this alone or with a group. I'm used to doing it with a group, where you read maybe a paragraph of text and you sit still with it and listen deeply. And then you read it a second time, maybe a different person in a different voice, and you allow it to seep into you. Angie, you were mentioning earlier when we did the little warm up of the practice, maybe you could go have a cup of tea. Are you British? That might be the default for taking a moment, having a cup of tea. Well, I think of like the soaking in like a tea bag soaks in the hot water. When I'm going into this mode, I think I'm inviting the Holy Spirit, which means breath, but I think of myself as permeable, and I ask the Holy Spirit to come and seep in me like a tea bag and let this story move into me, into my cells. So it's not just, you know, in one ear and out the other, and it's not just cranial, it's incarnate. And so we'll read the story as I received it and have it in my journal, communicate it to my prayer partner. Sometimes I have more than one partner in the same call. Sometimes it might be a married couple or just a team of a couple of people, or it can be just one. And then we've sort of defaulted to asking for their guardian angel. Now, when you're at an IANDS meeting, some people will use guardian angel as a category. Others might say a spirit guide. I don't know, there might be other nomenclature for how to refer to such a person, but in my tradition, it's just a guardian angel. I'll very often ask their guardian angel, would you mind being the first one to speak? And they do something that's on the order of a mic test, which again, Angie, you and I did a mic test before coming on this. And it's a good thing we did because my internet was unstable. But I asked them to come on and do a mic test, in part to show these people how easy it is to borrow the voice. And I should have said this earlier, but all of the people that I deal with, they're a subset who died sudden, violent, tragic, instantaneous deaths. So I don't get people that died in hospice, and rarely get people who die of an illness. Most of mine are accidents, shootings, stabbings, car, plane crashes. So they've been through some trauma earlier, so I want to be as gentle as possible. They probably never borrowed another human person's voice before, so they're doing something that they've never done. So their guardian will often come on and speak first, and there'll just be a little bit of banter at the beginning, a little getting to know you. The guardians usually choose a name that has something to do with the person that we're helping, or whatever they'll choose. Recently, there was a guy that died in a daredevilish fall, and his guardian went by the name Orville. And I said, well, why would you choose Orville? Well, he said, well, the Wright brothers, they were young and they were daredevilish. They didn't die doing that, but a lot of other people did in the early days of flight. And he said, and I chose Orville rather than Wilbur because in the kingdom, the last come first, and Orville's almost always the second one mentioned. So I'm picking his name. So it's funny, they'll just choose like a nickname, and they'll sometimes in the dream, I know that I was in a car crash and that I was the driver, but I didn't know what gender I was. Somehow the person telling the story didn't accentuate their gender. Sometimes they'll be in a country other than the US and it feels different, but I'm not sure. Sometimes there'll be a lot of characters in the same dream, and I'm not certain who's the person that is the protagonist, who's the one that we're here to help. And sometimes we're helping a group. There might be somebody who stands out of a group and is a spokesperson, but a group moves at once.
Are they always English speakers?
That's funny. I'm going to mention Nadi, who was from Iraq. Nadi had made a point of saying, I never spoke English. I can't believe I'm talking to an American, a Christian, and a priest, but here I am. And he said, and by the way, I'd never learned English, but I'm forming my thoughts as I always did, and they're coming out in English.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So you're basically saying then that although the Catholic Church doesn't want you to use the term channeling, but when you're actually communicating and you're asking the guardian angel or the guide to speak first, they're actually speaking through you. So you're in a prayer situation, maybe in a Zoom call.
Yes.
And it's your voice that's coming out. And then presumably it's the person who's stuck's voice. Now, does your voice change, or is it always your voice?
Only a little. Did you notice I went into a Southern accent when I was quoting Ray?
Very good at that.
Yeah, well, I'm from Southeast Texas. I can put the twang on if I need to. But I'm no good at an Irish accent, or even your British accent. I can't do it. I don't even try. I do it poorly. But no, I use the example, our vocal cords are a fixed physical item. Air moving through vocal cords. Anybody using my voice is going to have to deal with the physics of it. And I give the example too of a violin, which in a country western bar could be a fiddle. It's going to sound very different in a concert hall. It could be the same instrument, but people could produce very different sound from it, but it's never going to be a tuba. You're going to get a certain kind of sound out of my vocal cords, but people will have a different pace. Some people will speak rapidly or slowly. They have to use vocabulary that's available that I have. They can't use a word that I don't have in my vocabulary. And they have to stay in English. It's going to come out in English.
Mm-hmm. And so the prayer partners or partner that you have recognizes when you're actually channeling?
I try to make it easier for them. I'll say, this is Nathan, but I'm about to, where the next voice that you're going to hear is Jim. I record all of these on an app on my phone and get them transcribed. And I must have about 300 of them stored. There are only 26 of them that are in the public realm. I don't tell any of them in public until I go back and ask their permission to tell their story. And in the middle of what we're doing to help them move in the afterlife, it just seems opportunistic and rude to ask them right in the middle of that. Oh, by the way, I'm writing a book. Don't leave yet, because I want to know if I can use your story. So we'll go back to them only if we feel like we have an important reason. And then we'll get a little bit of an update. And I have those stories in the books as well.
So let's go back to Ray himself. Yeah. So you to find out that he had been basically stuck here for many 40 years, watching his wife. Did he ever talk about wanting to go to the light? Did he talk about, was he a ghost essentially? Was he actually doing ghostly types of things? Was he here the entire time? He hadn't transitioned at all and then come back?
I'm not certain. It wasn't like, haunting the hotel room, at the creepy haunted hotel. It wasn't that. It was some sort of keeping an eye on. It doesn't necessarily mean that he lived in her house in South Carolina. Somehow he could keep checking in. That's what it seemed like to me. So where was he in that? I'm not really sure. When I wrote the books, I thought about, my sister is my editor. She runs a publishing house. And I wanted a little inset, one of those kind of shaded boxes that you often see, like USA Today is all full of those things. And I wanted to put a box that said, I don't know, but here's what I think. And she said, no, you may not. You need to establish yourself as an expert in what you do before you start telling people you don't know. So I went with what my editor said, but I don't know where Ray was exactly, except that it seemed to me sort of between worlds.
Right. And so what happened in the end? Obviously, his wife passed and he was able to greet her. Did you transition him, or did he transition himself, or is he still here?
No, that's all he wanted to do, was to be able to greet her. But that meant having to go out of the isolation that he had created for himself at the moment of his death. He was the one that chose isolation, but we guided him. He didn't really want to be isolated. He wanted to greet his wife. So he was the one changing. We were just helping him make the change that he wanted to make. And then after that, we did go back to him to ask permission to use his story, particularly because it was the first one. And he told us that, he said, most of my life I went to school, and I didn't like school and it didn't like me. They were always trying to teach me things I didn't want to know. And he said, but now I know there's something I've learned how to do, and I'd like to know how to do it better. So now that I learned how to greet my wife, I found out that there's other people that need to be greeted. And somebody said to me, would you like to learn more about how to do this? And I said, I sure would. So he decided that he wanted to go to Afterlife school to be a greeter.
So he must be on the other side then in order to do that.
Yes, and even the other side, it seems to me more like the radio band, if you can imagine tuning in to, and this is all vibration of some kind, but there seem to be levels where a person can only go, and they do use spatial language, up so far, and then they're not ready for what's above that. But what we do is help them move from one plane to the next, if you want. That doesn't mean they can't come back and visit at the previous one, but now many more possibilities open to them at this next level. So when we use the phrase crossing over, we're crossing over some sort of bandwidth or energy level, or moving from here to there. But they're not forbidden to come back. It's just that new vistas open up for them.
And you said earlier that there are different beliefs about reincarnation, and that different exit points that we choose with our committee, our soul family, if you will, to come into this incarnation and experience certain events. What's your take on that, given your experience and your background?
It hasn't come into play. I haven't had anybody talk about their pre-birth conference or their soul cluster or any of those things that I've become more familiar with by being a member of IANDS and listening to people. No, the ones, this is a small subset, so I'm not saying, I think I'm looking into an afterlife peephole. I haven't been given a guided tour of the universe. But the little population that I deal with, no, they talk about the life that they have been living and how it ended abruptly, and then what they've experienced since then that brings them to this important day. It feels like graduation day, or any of you who have had to been in medical care over a period of time and moved from ICU to private room to step down to all the way to the door. I believe that we're like the discharge staff. We help people that don't need this help anymore or what this level can afford. And we help them gather themselves and get a companion to help them move along.
Tell us about the idea that Ray chose and was able to choose to remain in isolation once he had passed.
Yes.
He was on this plane, was he not? I'm trying to just understand this. He was on this plane. He died suddenly.
He seemed like a visitor to this plane in that original dream. It wasn't like he was hanging out in the garage where he died, nor was he in his former wife's house in South Carolina. He could see and watch, but it didn't feel like that was his residence, like a ghost that might reside in a place. He was somewhat removed from that. Other stories that I've dealt with, I remember one young man who died in a fraternity accident. He fell from a tree during a series of athletic contests. He had to climb a tree and grab something that was in the tree and climb back down, and he fell into his death. And he stayed in a field for a while, but then his guardian said to him, what if we move the whole thing up? If you like these surroundings and if they make you feel comfortable, what if we transfer it all to the next level? So he was able to kind of keep what was immediate to him, but somehow his guardian helped him transfer it to the next level.
Interesting. Well, tell us some more.
Well, let's see. I'm looking in the chat right now to see if anybody had some that they particularly wanted to hear about. I want to tell you about Nadi because he's just such a sweetheart. Nadi was what he called the wrong kind of Muslim. He was living in Iraq during all the violence there, and the mosque where he was a worshiper was caught up in that Sunni Shia violence that's gone on for centuries, I guess. Anyway, his mosque had already been blown up, and it didn't have a proper imam anymore. He was like an elder in the congregation, but without proper leadership. He was one who kind of rose to the surface. He was a businessman, and they now needed a safe place to worship because their house of worship had been destroyed. So he was one who sought out a place, and they tried to find a place that was pretty much windowless because they wanted something that felt like a bunker. They found it, but his people separate by gender, and the men and the women don't pray in the same room side by side. So the women were in an adjacent building across the street while the men were in a different one. And while they were at prayer, he heard machine gun fire out the door. Then they all had to make a decision. They could hear the sounds of women screaming. That could be our wives and our daughters. Do we stay in here where it's safe, or do we go try to protect our families? He decided that he was going to open the door, and when he did, he saw people bleeding in the streets. But as is often the case in these multiple gunshot things, people aren't always aware immediately where the danger is coming from. Where's the shooter? And he said, I wasn't exactly sure where to go, but then he said almost immediately, I was confronted by a 10-year-old girl with a machine gun and an angry man pointing guns at her head, telling her to shoot me. And he said, she did that, and I died. Well, then he went on to describe, what happened next, and it was just, it was both heartbreaking and so encouraging to hear the support that he got immediately after his death. He said, I didn't pay that much attention to the angels, but they were all around me. And he said, you know how in our religion, we think it's wrong to create images of God, you know, pictures or depictions of the angels or persons in our worship space. We have only mosaics, patterns of color. And he said, the angel showed me that that's what they were, that they were energetic beings that were full of color. But he said, do you know what a kaleidoscope is? And I said, sure, I used to have one when I was a child. And he said, it's like that. They're colors that move. And he said, I didn't know the angels were around me all the time, but they were, and they looked like the mosaics that were in our mosques, except they were alive, and they were brilliant, and they were carrying me away from the violence. And one of the things that happens in a lot of these scenes is that people die with violent trauma, crashing through a windshield or being hit by gunfire, burning in a fire. Many of them tell me, well, that's true, that happened to my body, but I was taken out of it moments before that happened. Which is, I haven't lost people to, you know, really violent trauma, but it would comfort me if I knew that, at least I hope, you know, I have reason to hope that she didn't go through the windshield. One lady died in a fire, and she said, well, it's true that my body was burned, but I wasn't in it at the time. So anyway, where Nadi was concerned, he was just such a sweet man, and he cared about religion. And he said, you know, I knew that there were some things in my religion that were very important, that there were other things that just seemed angry or divisive. And he said, I just tried to be a good man who lived his faith and loved. And he said, I died by saying prayers that offended other Muslims. And he said, I'm now in a place where I'm beyond all of that, and here I am talking with a Christian and a priest, and we're talking about love. And he said, it's very good here. And then because he hadn't really finished a crossing, we said to him, well, normally when we're meeting with somebody, we're helping them move from one level to the next. Is that why you're here? And he said, yes, I don't know what it is, but they've told me that I'm now ready to move to a next level. And they've said that because I was a leader of my community, that they wonder if I would be willing to lead others in the process. And he said, well, I haven't even done it once, but I'll try. Whatever it is that you're wanting me to do, if I can help other people do it, I will. So when we got to that point, he said, they told me to be still. And he said, the place where we are is beginning to have a little bit of water. We're beginning to stand in water, like waiting. And then he said, almost all of us were affected by the major rivers of our country, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And our country wouldn't even exist had it not had these two big rivers in it. It's in an arid part of the world. It was really only fertile because of these rivers. He said, almost all of us have a connection to the water and to the rivers. And he said, several times a year, there would be festivals that were held on the river on small flat boats, on shallow boats, and they would be decorated according to what the holiday was. But many of us were used to bringing our families down to the river and swimming or wading and stuff. And he said, as it's unfolding, there's a parade of floats, and on each float there are whatever a person most needs to see to be comfortable and happy and even enticed to move along. And he said, everybody's seeing what they need to see. They're seeing loved ones that are encouraging them to, they can't be pulled against their will, but if they want to, they have the opportunity to just get aboard. And so he described this lovely parade and said, it's time for me to go now. My father is here and he's holding out his hand for me to take it. So I will be leaving now. So there was a parade, and nobody, and the floats kind of went around where they made it easy. All a person had to do was stick out their hand and they would be brought on. But if they didn't choose to do that, they weren't shamed. I hear that all the time. Nobody's made to feel like the dumb kid. You know, were you ever in a classroom where you knew you were in the dumb kid reading group or the smart kid math group? whatever. He said, none of us are made to feel that way. We're all just respected, and we can move at whatever pace we want to. But that's the way he left. He left on a float, on a parade, in a parade.
Any idea how long he'd been here?
Not very long. I would say fewer than 5 years. You know, that violence has kind of gone out of the news while we've been, moved on to Ukraine now. But, it wasn't very long ago that we were hearing about Iraq day after day. And it was in the midst of all that when this dream happened.
So tell us some more of your stories.
Well, in the Maureen, you mentioned in the chat, there was a young woman who we call the Tippler. Are you still there, Maureen? Yeah, there you are. This dream was different in that most of the stories are the protagonist's own violent death. This one was not. It was a moment in her life where she died inside. Maybe some of us know someone who's had something happen to them that has just so wounded them that they've sort of died inside and maybe given up, and are still sort of walking around. She was in the dream. She had me in her eyes, because the dream teller can tell the story the way they want. But she had me inside her vision. She was behind the wheel of a car. It was a station wagon, and she had hair that flipped. Can you think of a high school yearbook from 1965 where the hairdos on the women went like that? Everybody had these she was blonde with this hairdo that suggested to me about 1964, 65. She was looking over her shoulder through a bunch of rambunctious children, looking back, and she was backing up a car that hit something, and she said, "Oh no." And I woke. Well, she went on to describe to us that she was in a marriage that was becoming sort of unhappy, and she and her husband had he would work, and she was home with 3 kids. He would come home from work and they'd have a cocktail and have dinner, but he began staying at work more and more. She'd warm over his plate long after they'd eaten. And she said, I began to tipple. Is that a word you've ever used in a sentence, tipple?
Is that to drink a little bit?
A little day drinking. It's sipping, going into the wine a little early, tippling. She described herself as a tippler.
Yes.
Well, she said that day, it was my carpool day, and I'd been tippling. And she said when she was backing up, the thing she hit was a child, and she struck and killed a child. And she was found to be over the legal limit of alcohol. She was arrested on the spot. She said, I was never in my own house ever again. I went directly from the car to police custody. I never saw my house again. My husband divorced me. He married another woman who raised our children. I spent 19 years in jail, and I was hated by everyone who knew me. So that's what she showed us. It wasn't her death. It was the day she felt like she died inside. And so as we did with everybody else, we say, well, there must be better times ahead, or you wouldn't be in our line. You wouldn't have come here unless you were ready to make a move. So let's talk about that. And we asked her about her own death, and she said, well, when I got out of jail, I moved to a different town because I couldn't possibly go back where I was so hated. But I got a job as a motel maid. And she said, one day I was flipping a mattress and my back went out and I ruined it, and I could never work again. So she ended up renting an apartment on the 2nd floor of a complex, and she looked out the window at an asphalt parking lot. She smoked, and she said, I sent a neighbor out for groceries and I had her put them next to the door. So she didn't engage anyone at all, even the person that brought the groceries. And I said, well, did you die there? Or my friend did. The prayer partner said, did you die there? She said, no, I got sick enough that I had to go to a nursing home. But they knew at the nursing home that I didn't like it if people came in the room. So they gave me the oldest, sickest ladies that had no visitors. And it'd be a succession of them, but there'd always be somebody that was just quiet and maybe even in a coma. She said, I eventually died. And my prayer partner said, well, what about when you were in jail? Did anybody come and visit? And she said, yes, my mother did. And it was so surprising because I didn't even think she liked me. We never got along. But when I was in jail, she would come and visit me. And she never shamed me. She just showed up when visitors were allowed. And my friend said, well, now that you're in the afterlife and you're kind of isolated again, it seems like you've chosen a cell. I thought he was kind of right on. She had like Ray, chosen an isolation. And but you've been in a cell before, and there was somebody that was willing to visit you. What if we asked your mother to come? Has she died? And she said, yes, she died before I did. I said, well, would you be willing to see if that worked? Could we ask your mom to come? And she said, well, if she visited me in jail, maybe she would come here. And so we said, well, let's give it a try. What do we have to lose? So we just said a prayer and said, her name was Shelley. We'd like Shelley's mom to come and visit her if she's available. And she showed up, and Shelley said, well, there she is. Said, well, I guess, all you really needed to do was ask. And she knows you very well. She wouldn't lead you into something that she knows you wouldn't like. Do you feel safe to go with her? And she said, yes, I do. So off they went.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. They're just so, but their stories are so lovely in that they have so much pain in them, but they're on an upward arc. For me as a Christian, it moves from Good Friday is only 3 days from Easter morning. The worst happens, but then the best follows. And I believe that pattern, regardless of whatever religion or none at all that one might follow, I believe that's a universal pattern, that dark becomes light, day follows night.
You're suggesting, and this actually touches on something that Maureen wrote here as well, and that is that if the person is depressed and stuck in their human life, even though they transition, they can still feel somewhat stuck or somewhat unworthy. It doesn't necessarily change. Am I right? Maureen,
that's what I've seen.
Maureen comments and says, it seems as if we are stuck in this life, we get stuck in the next life. It seems that we could live with a lot more inner freedom.
Yes. I believe that any kind of therapeutic work that we do on ourselves is cumulative, and whatever it is that we need to learn, if we haven't learned it by the time we pass from here, that doesn't mean the clock struck 12 and that's that. I think the truth is very important. Sometimes, have you ever in your life formed some idea of what you believe to be true, but so exaggerated it as to be in your own way? Have any of you had that experience where you just form some idea about what's what, and you're stubborn and just insist that it must be the way I think it is because I think it's this way, and then maybe there's always a kernel of truth underneath things like that, but sometimes we can blow a truth all out of proportion to where it really is hardly true at all any longer. And sometimes they have to be confronted with that yes, it's true that something did go this way, but you've really gone too far with it, and we need you to come back this direction. Sometimes the guides will say, if you want to continue to go in that direction, especially towards vengeance towards somebody that harmed you, that is an option that you could exercise, but it won't be for your good, and we won't be able to accompany you in it. If that's the direction you want to go, we will go to the border, but we can't go there with you. We'd much rather you rethought that and chose a different path.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Maureen's question as well. She said she thought the woman who went to jail due to her drinking was sad. When those people who were so harsh on her, even though she was so harsh on herself, I wonder, do they get a chance to see how they could have treated her more kindly? Maybe with mercy being shown to her, she didn't, due to her backing up of car on purpose. I'm not sure I understand that last part, but it sounds as though
I was saying that she really didn't intentionally try to hit anybody. It was a real accident. She didn't see the child because all the kids.
Yeah, and she wasn't evil to the core. She was somebody that did a stupid thing, and
I thought that everybody words very harsh on her, that
Yes, they
maybe
were.
it made it even worse. Had there been kinder people around her, would that have maybe changed her course in life? That's what I was trying to get to.
It very well could have. My background is sociology. Do you have a background in the social sciences?
Yes.
In the social sciences, they teach you the importance of observation. You pick a thesis that you want to explore, you set up some kind of experiment, and then you watch and record what you saw, and then you report it. And if you want to extrapolate on the data and form an opinion about it, you're supposed to do that as a separate process. The first process is collecting. If you're going to go have an opinion about it, you're supposed to kind of bracket that. And so having an opinion about, Maureen, about the people that should have treated her differently and so on would be that secondary thing. And in these books, I try to stay to the data and just report the conversation. Remember, I record them all. And so they're in people's own idiom, in their own voice. I just try to report to you what I observed. But I agree with you. I wish people would have been kinder to her. And I hope that in the afterlife, that's happening. Many of you know about this 360 life review, or it gets called different things, but some sort of afterlife accounting of how what you said or did affected others around you, and how it might have been for good or ill. And there might be something that could still be corrected even now in the afterlife. I hope that Shelley has had an opportunity to come full circle with some of her former friends and maybe get over that awfulness.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a question from Barbara? Do you ever have someone who's passed on ask you to make contact with someone who's still in here on Earth?
No, I don't. I think my team and I have a reputation in the afterlife. They've observed us over 25 years now and kind of know our style. They know what we do, and we know that they know that we don't do that. So if that's what they're hoping to get, maybe there are other places where that happens, but that's just not what we do.
Who do you think, how do these stuck beings know to get in touch with you, as it were, through the dream state? How do you think that works?
I wanted to know the answer to that from the very first one. How did you find me? Well, and what the answer that I heard a lot was, I don't know, someone brought me here. We heard that a lot. One guy just said, your light was on. You know, like that old Motel 6 commercial, we'll leave the light on for you. I thought your light was on. Others have been told by their guardian or they have sort of like a healthcare team, because remember, they died really violent, tragic, sudden deaths. They need more than one kind of help, the way that we do when we're in a hospital setting. There might be a respiratory therapist, there might be a surgeon, there might be different people with different kinds of healing arts gifts. They've been through something like that before they come to my prayer partners and I. And they're often told, if you wouldn't mind, we think we have the team that would be perfect for you. Would you mind just letting us choose the next step? And very often they'll say, well, I had nothing but good care. Why would I want to object? I've been treated with nothing but kindness and respect and competence. And so why wouldn't I just let you take me where you think it's best?
But there's something about these particular spirits, human spirits, that are stuck. Tell us about that stuckness. How do you do?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm going to show you two book covers that look very much alike. This is the first one, Afterlife Interrupted, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over. Then the second book, we chose to keep the same graphics to keep the sense of the brand, but we struck through the word stuck, helping souls cross over, because what we began to see was that many of them weren't so much stuck as they were just in an appropriate afterlife space where they needed more care than most people do. They didn't have any time to get ready to leave the body. It was all so abrupt. And so they weren't so much stuck as they were just and needed a little more care. But some are stuck. I'll bet a lot of you are familiar with a trauma loop. Does a trauma loop, does that have meaning for you? Uh, uh, Particularly people coming back from war, from Iraq and Afghanistan in the US, sometimes they sleep off terribly because they can't control their subconscious in the night, and they see a recurring picture of some ghastly, bloody thing that they observed in the war. During the day, they might have that same trauma loop working, but they have a little bit of agency where they can kind of put it out of their mind and focus on a job. But the trauma loop always has a kind of a role. Some of the, for example, I'm thinking of Hal. Hal died in a trauma loop. He was in a traffic accident on a slick road where the roads were being widened, but the bridges weren't. And he came to a bridge and hit the abutment of it, and his car rolled down an embankment. And the last stimuli that he remembered while being in the body was tumbling inside a car without a seatbelt on. And he felt like he was the clothes in the dryer. And he was tumbling. And somehow in the afterlife, that was still a large part of his afterlife consciousness, was tumbling. Even though it didn't need to be, it just was. And his guardian had to work with that, and his team had to work with that and kind of coax him out of that a little at a time. I don't know, Angie, have you ever dealt with that in your practice of somebody that has a trauma loop and you have to kind of help them imagine their way out of it?
I haven't so far, but I know what you mean. I fell down the stairs head first a number of years ago, ended up in the emergency room, but I found myself for several nights afterwards, it's as though my brain wanted to relive the trauma of falling down the stairs.
Yes.
I remember thinking, I literally have to just stop this right now.
Yes.
I worked very, very hard, and eventually it stopped, but the brain just wants to go there and kind of relive the experiences.
Or sometimes your tongue. Have you ever had a little sore in your mouth, like a canker sore?
And you just keep
and you just can't leave it alone. You got to keep pushing your tongue over there and feeling that spot over and over again. There's just something like that. And sometimes they still have volition, and it's still their life, and they're free to do what they want to do, except freedom doesn't mean that much when trauma enters in. Trauma has a way of overriding a lot of freedom. And so they have to regain their agency. And they're oftentimes I see their guardians. I'm gonna give an example that's not in either of the books, but a man who died of a fall from a tall building, and it was on, the building was on fire, and he had a choice of either burning or he said, I could either breathe air that was on fire or air that wasn't on fire. But the air that wasn't on fire was out the window. And he said, I didn't take my life. I just chose to breathe air that wasn't on fire, but it meant going out the window. That's the way he put it. And he said, I could allow myself to fall, but I couldn't allow myself to land. So in his imagination, he could go out the window and he could fall, but in his imagination, he couldn't allow himself to land. Then he went on to say, gravity did just what gravity was designed to do. I did, in fact, land. But in my afterlife imagination, all I did was fall. And he fell for a long time until his guardian, he said, my guardian got tired of it. And he said to me, listen, all we ever do is fall. Would you please just let me for a moment? Would you get on my back and could we fly up? Just for a minute, then we can come back and fall as long as you like. And he said he tried to make me laugh at my circumstance, and I agreed to do it. And for a minute, I went up instead of down. And then he said, okay, if you're tired of that, you can go fall again if you want. But remember that you don't have to fall all the time. You could do something else. And that gradually got him moving in the direction of saying, you know, it is about time that I try something different.
Do you think that all souls that die tragically suddenly in these accidents are necessarily in this state? Or do you think that the ones that seem to come to you, there's something different about them, that's why they come to you, but other souls just go straight to the light? What do you think?
I try to make the point really strongly in interviews and in both books that I don't believe that most people that die in sudden violent ways need this kind of help. I just think it's a small subset. Any of you that have studied psychology, you know, Freud was such an out front leader and you know, one of the initiators of psychology as a science. But then Jung comes along, and so do others, and Freud gets criticized for using a psychopathological population as his baseline. He begins saying things about the human psyche based upon observations with a bunch of people with mental illness, and I remember that, and I'm careful to remember that this little population that I've been involved with is not normal. Most of us don't die in these ways, so but some do.
But it's not that these souls don't believe in God or an afterlife, because some of them do. I mean, for example, Noddy, I think you said, was a church-going person.
Yes.
Ray, to some extent, had had some exposure to Christianity. So what do you think is the common denominator here that makes them stuck?
The content of their imagination. What did they imagine themselves to be? I'm very strong on that. For example, all of us were unconscious some hours ago. Do you remember waking up this morning?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in different times of your life, you've awakened happily. Maybe you woke to an unhappy circumstance, a tense circumstance or whatnot. Our frame of mind when in our consciousness has such effect over how our events unfold for us. And I found that some of these people just, for a while, they got in the habit, or they felt optionless, sort of like painting themselves into a corner. They felt the only way that they can respond to what happened to them was the response they chose. And then again, Angie, you and I both counsel people. Don't you find that sometimes the help that you offer is to challenge them and say, well, I understand why you think that, but it's not the only way you could think. What if you thought this way? Don't you find yourself doing that for clients?
And then it's their option.
It's their option, but you at least pose to them the possibility that there's more than one way that you could deal with this, and the way you're dealing with it right now has brought you to me.
Interesting.
You're sad in some way, or you're frustrated in some way, or you wouldn't be with me. And so I want to see if I can offer you some options that seem appealing to you. Could you at least try them for a moment? I'll very often go gradually and say, could you try this?
So you think these souls were actually closed to the idea of progressing onto the other side, even though they may have had a guide or angels with them, that they just didn't want to become aware of the option, and they chose to continue in this state? Because it doesn't sound like a happy state, it sounds like a stuck state, and it's not transitioning, but it's not part of this world, it's not part of the next world, it's sort of somewhere in the middle.
Well, none of us want to spend our life in a hospital, but a hospital isn't necessarily an unhappy place. You'd rather be home and healthy, but you don't have to be miserable in a hospital. You could be grateful for the care you're getting, and you might pay attention to the progress you're told you're making, and so on. But yeah, they're in a difficult space because of something that happened to them.
Right.
But it doesn't need to be depressing necessarily. They can be improving, and
the other side seems to know when they're ready, just as in Noddy's case, that little whatever it was, that little train or something that he could
the parade of floats
that he could jump on. So the other side sounds as though it's very much in touch with where these people are, where these souls are, and that's why they come to you, because maybe they're ready at that point to transition to something else.
Yes. One of the things that I've seen is the therapeutics of whatever this is always work, and the diagnostics are always right on. A lot of people that fight addiction or persistent psychological problems are given a drug in hopes that it will work. It's going to take a couple of weeks to see whether this is effective or not, or whether it has side effects or whatnot. There's a certain, professional guesswork built into things, into some therapeutics. And what I've seen in the afterlife is they always know exactly what will work.
Yes.
I've had people, one guy that was from South America, and he lived in poverty. And after his death, he said, I woke up in this hospital and I figured I must be rich. The linen was clean. The help was all attentive. everything they did for him made him better. He just thought he would never have been able to afford this kind of health care, and here he was. He didn't realize he was dead exactly. He came to understand that, but he said, it's so different. If I had still been back on the earth, I wouldn't have had anything like this level of care.
So he was actually being looked after, no longer on this plane as a soul, but almost being looked after as though he were in a heavenly hospital.
Yes, and sometimes they're told that for a while they were treated, because their transition was so abrupt and violent, sometimes they were allowed to think that they hadn't died, that they were in a hospital on Earth. But then there was a moment where they felt like the care team felt like it was now appropriate for you to know that, yes, in fact, you did die.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? How gentle that process is.
Yes, so compassionate, so attentive to when the moment is right.
Absolutely, because one of my questions was going to be, do these people know that they've died? How long does it take them to discover that they've actually died and to accept it?
Well, I don't get them until they're ready to move. So I'm not dealing with them at that moment. But sometimes they'll say, yes, for a time I was unclear on whether or not I had died, and then they had to gently let me know that in fact had occurred.
And is that their guides? Their guide?
It's always a team. To me, it just feels like a therapeutic team.
Therapeutic team, very interesting.
Yeah.
Again,
because these people need extraordinary help.
Yes, no doubt. What about suicides? Have you had any suicides?
I have, and I wrote about 2 of them in the more recent of the 2 books. Both of these suicides are from the 1920s or 30s. They occurred in the same dream, which is very rare. They were already paired, and one dream story led into the next. And I woke up and wrote them down that way. And I wondered, this seems strange, but it was 2 different people, a man and a woman, each of whom had taken their life. But both of them were in the United States, and they were both in the late 20s, early 30s.
And
I share their stories in part because they were each able to say, I've been gone from the earth so long that reading about my story would not be opening a wound for anybody still on earth. I would be an old photo.
So that's why they agreed to go into your book, is what you're telling me.
Correct. They allowed their stories to be told publicly.
Okay. Now, these people who had committed suicide, in the 20s and 30s, obviously almost a century ago, they just recently came to you?
I think each of those is maybe 2 years ago.
Okay, so they can be in this, as far as Earth time is concerned, they can be for 80, 100 years.
Yes, and that might sound punitive, but that's not the experience of the people that have been in it. I'm talking to all of you. I mean, Angie and I are talking back and forth a lot, but we're talking in your presence and for your benefit. Do any of you know somebody that never knows what time it is, or doesn't know what day of the week it is, or where they're supposed to be? There are some of us that just don't. Yesterday, I was supposed to say the 5 o'clock mass, and I didn't. And my pastor was texting me saying, "Where are you?" And I was across town. He had to jump in and do it. I was ashamed because I'm a priest and I'm supposed to know when it's time to say mass. And actually, that's a nightmare that I have. I'm swimming. I'm at the beach, and I realize, oh my heavens, it's 5 minutes till time for mass. I'm supposed to be. Anyway, it happened yesterday. But these people, sometimes they pay a lot of attention to time, and other times they just don't. And in this case, both of these people were willing to have their stories told, but they needed to finish a crossing that they hadn't yet done. That's why they were in the line at all.
Right. Do you, let's see some of the questions. We have Maureen. Do you think there is a different dimension? Do you think there is different dimension in heaven?
Yes, absolutely. Again, it seems to me like the radio band.
Different dimensions, perhaps.
Or different levels of frequency and so on. There's repeated references to it. And people are told, you can come back here and visit. You're not saying a permanent goodbye to people that you've come to love here, but you really don't need to hang around in the hospital, even though you've made kind of hospital friends. This isn't your final destination. You've got other things to do.
Do you ever get confirmation that these people actually did exist? Confirmation?
Only a little. And you and I spoke offline about as my ministry becomes better known, and I'd like to branch out and work with people at the university level, like IANDS, started with, a journal, an academic journal and so on. To this point, I've been more of a pastoral minister, and it hasn't seemed necessary to prove to my listener or reader that I can verify, but that might be important. And frankly, this summer, that's my main prayer, is I'm asking the Holy Spirit, do you want me to start asking people for address, death certificates, detail that might verify that they in fact were who they said they are.
Well, the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia looks at past life memories. They do investigations. And so you have a lot of young children, I'm sure all of you know about this, and they can very often verify, and it just adds so much credibility to what they're doing. And it sort of ties a very nice knot, and there's a beginning, middle, and an end to it. And I expect that if you're guided to it, I'm sure the spirits themselves could, as you said, guide you to time, place, maybe a source where you could verify. You wouldn't necessarily have to do every one, but if you just did some key ones, that would be enough, really.
I think so, and I think I could do that. Even the way that we've gone about asking each person if we could use their story in a book, we got one turned down. And the woman didn't want her story used because she felt like her death was already a very public death. And she was in the news because of her death. And she didn't want her family to have another news cycle of spectacular coverage.
That's proof for you, even though you can't necessarily publish it. Maybe in the future, in 20 years, perhaps she might allow you to publish.
And that's the way we left it. I said to her, we might be back in touch should a moment come when you might think differently. Right. We just decided to leave it that way.
Yeah.
You would know her. You would know her story. It was a major news event, and that maybe that's one that I go back to. I don't know yet.
Right. After a certain number of years, you can go back, and then
that's what we were thinking. And she was saying my family became something on the order of celebrities because of my death. It changed the way they were perceived. It changed a lot of the things about the way their lives subsequently. She died in a spectacular way, and she said, had I just been killed in an automobile crash on my way home, nobody would know my name. But the way that I died makes me notable. And that same person, this was interesting to me. In that dream, I misidentified her gender and thought she was male when she was female. And I kind of was kicking myself for that. And she said, did you ever watch the Weather Channel? And I said, I absolutely did. Do any of you know the Weather Channel?
Yes, very good.
Did any of you ever watch it during hurricane season? I'm from Port Arthur, Texas, and my family is from New Orleans. So we've been through it over and over again since Katrina. Every year now, we dread the beginning of the hurricane season because it seems like we get hit every year. Well, anyway, when she said, when there's a big hurricane out there, they make a big fuss and they show you how perfectly formed the eye is. And look at all this energy, and it's so focused, and the winds are so high, and it's going to go over here. And they go on and on about how powerful it is, how focused the energy is. And then after they're finished with that, they'll say, oh, by the way, in passing, there's this little mess of clouds off the coast of Africa. And it looks like there's wind shear, and it might not be able to develop, and we're going to keep an eye on it. She said, after my death, I was like that mess of clouds off the coast of Africa. I wasn't like the big focused energy. I was this mess. And she she said, the same event that caused my body to die moved through me and made me a mess. And it took me a while to get everything moving in the same direction again. And she said, I was trying to do the best I could to communicate with you, but that wasn't your fault that you couldn't tell whether I was male or female. I just didn't have all the energy going the way that it needed to.
Do you think it could be that some of these souls are more attached to to physical type sensations, and that's why they remain on this plane longer? It's a question from Barbara.
I'm not sure. One thing that some remain for is feeling cut off from the job of getting their children to adulthood. I don't know if some of you must have raised children. Maybe you've known somebody who died before their children were adults. I've dealt with some people who died suddenly, and somewhere along the line, the role of parenting began to be more important than any other thing in their life, because these little ones were so dependent upon them. And then when they died suddenly and abruptly and left their kids, others who tried to encourage them to think about a future or to have some other focus about your eternal ongoing life, they were too angry about having been ripped away from the meaning of their previous way of being that they just didn't want to take part. No, thank you. I don't want to have anything to do with, I'm just too angry about what happened to me to focus on some other thing.
Okay, so even when you literally go into your soul state, you can still retain the anger and still have free will.
That's what I've seen. And then people will tell them, well, we didn't mean to upset you or disturb you or whatnot. It's just that we want you to know that you can continue in this way of thinking, in this mode of being for as long as you like. But there are other possibilities for you. And when you're ready to entertain them, we'll be here.
Just as it is on this plane, just as
Yes.
it is on this plane, essentially.
Yes. And then sometimes they have to see the downsides of a decision that they make. You know, if you decide to stay this way, here are the consequences of it for good or ill. And then they can make a choice rather than, sometimes we think we're making a choice, but we've really just defaulted out of some passion. I'm a priest and a confessor, and sometimes people will come in and their conscience accuses them of something, but then we have to kind of do like what a court or judge or a jury would do and say, yeah, but you know, how guilty are you of this? It depended upon a lot of different circumstances. And sometimes people are more harsh with themselves than is good for themselves.
But we do that all the time. We're our own worst critics.
Yes.
So on the other side, that doesn't necessarily change.
Not instantly. I've had one lady here, Wilhelmina is in, I think, book 2. She was another example like the Tippler, who told us a story that wasn't about her death, that was about her husband's death. They were retired and they were surprised at how much they were enjoying each other's company as empty nesters. They had raised kids most of their marriage. They had kids early, and she said it was always about the kids, even as they grew, and then grandkids. And eventually we got to a place where it was just the two of us, and we looked at each other and thought, I still like being around you. And they were enjoying doing almost nothing. She said, we got up and we had breakfast and we talked about what we'd have for lunch. And maybe we garden a little, we'd putter about the house and take care of the pets. And this particular lady, she said, I hated mending, but it needed to be done. So I had a basket I would throw the torn sock in, or the button, the shirt that needed a button. And a couple of times a year, I just decided this is going to be mending day, and I'd make an event out of it. And she said, I put on music and I talked to the mending, and I said, you, Mr. Torn Sock, it's your day. You just wait. Any minute now, you're going to be good as new. She said it was ridiculous, but it was a trick that I did to make myself do a boring job. She said I was in the middle of doing that when my husband walked into the room and dropped dead in front of me. Eric, she called out, and he was just dead. She said, you know how people say someone was dead weight? Well, he was dead weight. No, he was just dead. And I ran to the neighbors, and she said, before I knew it, the house was full of police and strangers, and she dissociated. she decided I couldn't stay in this pain. So I moved one step out of it, and I started thinking, what should a woman do when her husband just dropped dead? She probably should go to his closet and pick out the clothes he'll be laid out in. She probably ought to call his workplace and tell them, you know, she decided, she said, I became an actress. I acted like what I thought people wanted me to be. And she said it was so laborious and tiresome that I tried to run out of my, she went to church, she was a Catholic, which is why she chose me. She said they showed me catalogs of how I might make this passage. And she said, I used to shop from the J.C. Penney and the Sears catalog. And they gave me a catalog and they said, here, look through here and you'll find somebody that can help you cross. And I turned a page and there was this priest. I said, well, I think I'll do that because I was a Catholic and I would trust a priest. So that's why she got in my line. She's catalog shopped.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, once she was with us, she described how she quit living, except at this very, very low level. And she'd go to mass, but not to the coffee and donuts, because that would mean she'd have to talk to people. And she'd go to the grocery store, but if anybody stopped her, she'd make an excuse about the dog or the cat. I need to get back to the dog or the cat. And then she pretty much shut down her children and grandchildren. And she said, I became a kind of a weird, cranky old woman that nobody wanted to be around. And then she said, I got sick and I had to live in a nursing home. And eventually I died there and I just hoped it would all restart. And she said, I got here and they said, yeah, but you quit living some time ago and it's still your life. You have to take it up again. We have to teach you how to live your life again. So she had something like physical therapists that got her to gradually start being the agent who chose things again. And she said they started with kids from my elementary school years before I was married, and they'd bring little people around to visit, and they'd say on their way out, whenever you're ready, we're going to go shopping, or we're going to take you to the beach. They would kind of entice her with things that she could do with them later when she was up to it. And she said it was sort of like the way that when you get old and ill, they applaud you when you get from the bed to the chair. And she said they applauded me like that. And they said, look, pretty soon you're going to be walking down the hall and then you're out the door. And eventually that's the way it worked. And her husband showed up for her. That was a real sweet one for people that have an idea of reuniting with a dead spouse. When it was time for her to cross, Eric came for her, but he came for her looking like a 16-year-old on their first date. And she said he's holding roses that he picked out of his mother's garden. They're not the store-bought kind that all look perfect. They're different colors, and maybe they have some bug ate part of it. She said, but they're sweet, and he's looking like this little teenager that wants to coax me out on a date. And so she responded to that, and they went off hand in hand.
So that team on the other side, she was in kind of low energy, low spirits. They had to sort of get her up, because she'd stopped living while she was still alive, essentially.
And they told her, it's true, you're giving us very little to work with, but you're giving us that and we will work with it. If going slow is what you want to do, then we'll go slow.
And then she was able to get some momentum, get a little bit of energy, enthusiasm back for life. And then
people coaxed her into things. And it wasn't always little kids from school. It was younger women who said, we're going to go out on a girl date. We're going to have a nice lunch and we're going to shop and stuff. And we hope that next time we come, maybe you'll be ready then.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, Mike has a comment, and this has to do with when we were talking about, the span of maybe 80 to 100 years from the transition point till they actually find you. And he said that he's had hour-long meditations that seem to last only a few minutes.
Yeah.
Time is a very, very elusive concept, is it not?
It is. And it really is. It's really all about now. Now is the most important element of time.
Exactly. Well, tell us a few more of your stories.
Well, let's see. Well, I love well, it's like, which is your favorite child? They're not my children, but they're my friends. And
Another one.
Paul was a really interesting one. Paul died in the early 1950s, and he had just graduated high school, and had borrowed his grandmother's car to go on a double date. And he said the other couple were had romance on their mind, and he said, I was with a gal pal. That's what he called her. But the ones that had romance on their mind had some beers. He said, I didn't drink a drop, but they wanted a dark, secluded place. And so he pulled off a highway in upstate New York, and it was in the dark. And he drove down a road, and he went on to what he thought was a wooden bridge. He could feel the wood under it, but he said it was really dark. But it turned out that it was a pier.
Oh my goodness.
And he accidentally drove his grandmother's car off the end of a pier. And in the dream, he showed me a car kind of trying to fly, that if only it could go far enough, it could get to the other side, but it couldn't, and it falls in. Well, he ended up drowning, and he said the funerals were horrible.
Four people in the car?
Four teenagers, all of whom had just graduated high school.
Oh my goodness.
And 2 boys and 2 girls, and he was the driver. It was his fault. And he tried to stay at the scene of the accident to take a picture for the insurance. He said, I didn't have a camera, but I knew I shouldn't leave, and I should stay there and make sure that, I'm responsible. And responsibility was a huge category for him. And then when this happened to end his life and 3 others, he felt colossally responsible for it. And he called himself -4 man. Did all of us have to read the Scarlet Letter in high school? In most American English classes, we had to read the Scarlet Letter. And so Hester Prynne, had sex outside of marriage. And so she has to wear this red A because she's an adulteress. And he remembered that, and he decided he was -4 man. And he had to wear this -4 on his chest as a sign to everybody that he was the one that took 4 lives away from the earth. That was his construct. Well, my friend John it was his first time out as a prayer partner, and he drew that one. And he started listening to the guy, and he said, wait a minute, where are the other 3? And Eric Paul had to say, I haven't seen them since that moment. And he said, well, you know what it sounds like to me, Paul? It sounds like 3 people out of 4 crossed just fine, and 1 of them got stuck. It sounds to me like you're -1 man. The other 3 went just fine, but you're somehow in the middle, and we need to help you somehow.
Right.
And then John turned the whole thing. He just finished high school. John turned the whole thing into algebra, and he appealed to algebra. And Paul said, "I loved algebra. Why? Oh, I never thought about algebra. Why would we be talking about algebra?" And he said, "Well, look at it. On either side of the equal sign, you have some things that you have to solve for an unknown. There's an X on one side, and then if you're -1, you add -1 plus 1, and then you add +1 to the other side of the equal sign, and you cross over, and then you solve for the unknown." And he said, how can we get you to cross over to the other side of the equal sign? Somehow we need a +1 if you're -1. At first he helped him see, no, you're not -4, you're -1. Now we need +1 to get you to the other side. And then he said, wait just a minute, something's shifting. So we waited, and he said, it's my high school principal, Mr. Wambacher. And our colors were purple and gold. And he's got this football jersey. It's purple and gold, and it has a +1 on it, and he wants me to put it on.
Wow. Wow.
So he puts on a shirt from his high school that makes him look like a football player with a +1 on it, and Mr. Wambacher and he walk away.
My goodness.
Isn't that sweet? And then about a year later, we were dealing with a guy that died in a car accident. And who showed up for him but Paul? I said, "Oh, Paul, we had talked to Paul in order to share his story in book 1. And I was just about to start writing book 2. Paul shows up, who was in book 1, and he helps this guy in book 2. And that guy, the book's right here. That was Brady. Brady was the also died in a car crash. Paul is the one that came for him. And Paul needed to kind of get back on the horse. That idea of Paul died making a driving error.
Yes.
And in the afterlife, they put him behind the wheel of a car and said, "You only made one driving error at all. It ended very badly, but that doesn't mean you have to think of yourself as a bad driver for all eternity. Here, get behind the wheel. This man needs a ride." And he agreed to do it. And so he drove Brady, and Brady got back in a car. They both needed to I fell off a horse. We owned horses when I was growing up. And my dad did make me get back on the horse that threw me, because he didn't want me to be afraid of horses ever after. So he said, "Son, get back on that horse." And I did. Well, here was 2 people that died in car crashes, and they both got back in cars.
To the other side, as it were.
And Paul drove Brady into his next part of the afterlife.
Now we have a couple of requests, and we have about 20 minutes left. So
Okay.
These are people who've been reading your books. So Denise is asking, could you tell the story about Jermaine?
Yeah.
Don, and then we have the other one, which is Maureen is asking, could you tell about
those are 2 of my favorites. And Maureen, I was going to try to tell the lawyer story, but yeah, Jermaine Don. I felt like this was a young African-American guy. I thought I was in a southern city where he died in an accident on a freeway where there was construction zone. And it felt in the dream like I was in a place where the population was outgrowing its roads. And I grew up near Houston, where that was just common. Everywhere you look, there were suburbs that were now that these little 2-lane roads were now carrying way more traffic than was safe. And that's what I felt like in this dream. And I thought I was in Charlotte or Atlanta, but when we got into it, he said, no, it was Savannah. I said, okay, well, I was at least in the region, in the neighborhood. And he said we had been out, he was with 3 other people. They had been out to a working lunch, and they were on their way back to work when they had to go through a section of the freeway that was under construction. He looked off to his right. He was in the back seat on the right. He was looking out the window, and he saw a stack of cement pillars, and he thought they looked unsafe. And they moved into this space, and just as they did, something shifted and they tumbled into the roadway. And he could see it about to happen, but he couldn't prevent it. And in the dream, he got out of the car and was trying to run away when he was crushed. I don't remember if that's exactly how it happened, but he got crushed. Well, it turned out he was very fastidious in his dress. And the way he looked before he left the house in the morning was very important to him. When he saw that his face was a bloody mess, he was horrified. And he felt like he could never show himself to anybody again because he was this bloody mess. And that was the idea that he formed that got him stuck, that I need to get cleaned up, but I don't know how. And so that's what he had to work through. We got him to think about when he really looked good, and he remembered being dressed up for prom, or like a Valentine's thing in high school or something, where you got all dressed up and got a corsage and all of that. He remembered really looking good and being excited about looking good. And he said, well, we think you could do it again. We just need to get you, we just need to move you from here to a next place where there'll be whatever you need. And he did cross, and he went on to tell us that he had gone into something that was sort of like the costume department of the theater, and he kept putting on clothes. And he liked to wear men's clothes from all different times in history, where where their clothes were fancier, ruffled collars or, powdered wigs or whatever. And he said, it's just a little bit of fun I'm having. He just needed to kind of feel good about how he looked. And eventually, he allowed us to come for him or to help him cross. And I think I'm remembering this correctly. Who is it that asked for that one? That was Denise. Are you going to see? Was that the one where the guy that came for him was the first responder, Ralph? This was really crazy. When it came time for, we always give them a choice. Can you think of somebody that you'd like to have come for you, where you call them by name? Would you rather just take the luck of the draw, whoever the right person is, or is there a celebrity or any famous person that you'd like? He just asked for the luck of the draw. And he formed his idea this way. He said, I don't want anybody to see me the way I look, but I know there are people that are used to seeing gory messes. There are some people that their job makes them see people looking like that. Maybe there's somebody like that wouldn't be shocked to see me this way, that could come for me. He formed that thought on his own, or maybe prompting, but he at least formed that thought, and that got him unstuck. And so we said, well, let's ask. That makes sense. Let's see if there's anybody in the afterlife that wouldn't be shocked to see a bloody face. And we went into prayer, and this guy named Ralph showed up. He was from Nebraska, and he was an EMT. He was on a call when his ambulance was, he called it a rolling hospital. His ambulance was T-boned by what he said was a teenager with earbuds. Somebody that wasn't listening and didn't hear a siren, and ran into him and caused his death. And then we said, well, how did you know how to come? And he said, my pager went off. He said, I was asleep, but my pager went off. And so in the afterlife, there was a guy who was also sort of stuck or asleep, who died suddenly, but his pager went off. And he was used to responding to the immediate need of someone who needed help, and he came. And we said to him, how are you going? You haven't even crossed. How are you supposed? It's the blind leading the blind. How in the world will you know where to go? And as soon as we asked that question, he said, look here, an escalator just showed up. And there's people at the top of it waving at us. All we have to do is get on it.
So in some cases, you're helping too.
We didn't intend it. We just get one thing led to another, and it was one afterlife traumatized soul helped another one. And
but Jermaine was stuck on how he looked physically.
How he looked, yes.
He didn't look that way once he passed, presumably, but he had it in his mind that that's
in his mind, he looked that way. It's hugely important what we imagine.
Yes. Let's talk. Tell us about the lawyer story.
I love him absolutely. I've recently had people sometimes ask me, how do you get away with being a Catholic priest and doing this work? And I just say, well, so far so good. I've really done something like this all my life since I was a child. It just took this particular form later in life. But I knew that when I started writing about this, this first book only came out in 2018. And I anticipated that I would get pushback from church folk, and I have, but so far it's been relatively mild. But anyway, this dream, it was very vivid. I was in a small southern town, and I was driving what we used to call a land yacht. These huge cars from the late 70s, like luxury cars, Lincolns, Cadillacs. They were big and heavy and hard to turn, loaded up with stuff. But anyway, I was driving one of these, and I knew I was an old man, and I took a left turn onto a side street that was near a river. But it was a business district of a small town with a river running through it. And then the street turned into a staircase in the dream. And now I'm going down a staircase bumping. I end up in water, and a current pushes the car from left to right, and I'm steering it, and nothing works anymore. And it's sinking, and I woke up. Well, when we were able to get with him, and my partner that day was Laura Dunham, who has since died. when I met Laura, she had already survived colon cancer. She had been for 25 years a Presbyterian minister. She became Roman Catholic late in life, which is why I met her. She was a parishioner of mine, but she was a very skilled counselor and had her own charismatic gifts, her own spiritual gifts. She was with was the prayer partner that day, and Shelby was his name, the old Southern lawyer. He reminded me of Colonel Sanders, you know, the little black bow tie, and looks like $1 million in a clean starched outfit. He looked like that to me. He explained to us that he had lived in the same town, was married more than 50 years when his wife died. He had had a law practice. He was very respected and had received awards and things for his civic service and stuff. But at the end of his life, his daughter was trying to get him to surrender the car keys because he was moving into dementia, but he wouldn't do it. He got up every morning, wore a suit, went to a cafe near the courthouse, hung out with his cronies, and he drove himself. But on the last day of his life, he took a turn and he thought he was on a street, but it was a boat launch. Have you ever launched a boat from a road? Very often at the end of it, the cement has ridges in it so that the back tire can have enough traction to pull itself up the slanted launch. He went down that and it bounced, and he drove himself into a river and drowned. But when he did, he stayed on the scene and he watched what happened next, which is one thing that people can do. And he watched the coroner, the people. Somebody pulled his car up out of this river muck. They took his body out of it, and it was covered in silt and gunk. And they cut him out of his clothes, and his naked, wrinkly body was there exposed. He was just horrified that anybody had to see that, and that he had died an old fool. And he didn't go to his funeral because he just couldn't bear the idea that he would be, that his death, that he died such an old fool. Well, who would go to a man's funeral and think such a thing? That would be really unkind to go to a funeral and chat about how stupid it was that he didn't give up the car keys. But he had that in his mind, that he had died an old fool, and he had ruined a lifetime of respectable stature. And what he had to yield in the afterlife was to get over it. All right, that happened, but it's an event that happened that's now over, but you're reliving it somehow, or you're making it affect your future. Do you really want to do that? Or would you rather do something else? And he's a lawyer. Somebody had to present him with an alternative set of facts or possibilities. And he said, I see the nonsense of what I'm doing, and it would be stupid to continue to do it. I just have to get over it. And he did. I don't remember who came for him. I'd have to go back and read it. Who brought that up? That was Maureen. Do you remember who came for him? Oh, I remember it now. It was a man from his church. He didn't even know the guy all that well, but the guy seemed to be a pillar of the community and was a few years older and had recently died. And everybody thought well of him. And he had this idea in his mind that this would be the perfect person to come for him. And he didn't even know him that well, just saw him across the aisle at church. But the man came for him. But then in his kindness, he came back when we asked permission to use his story. Laura and he kind of hit it off, my prayer partner. And he said, what I would like to do in my afterlife is I would like to help you people because you've been so kind to me. And he said, I was a churchman all my life, but only late in life was I asked to be on a church board. His Protestant church, he was asked to be on whatever they call it, the parish council or whatever. And he said, that was, I learned insight into how cruel church people could be. And kind of like how sausage is made. Maybe it would have been better that he just not served on the church board and he would have been a happier churchman. But anyway, he said, I saw how cruel church people could be. And I said, I don't want that happening to Father Nathan. And he said, if there's anything I can do from this side, I want him to know that he has legal representation in the afterlife.
And you may need it. No, I'm just joking.
Well, he said, if anybody accuses him of doing something that's of the devil, I know it's not true. I know that what he has done is a holy work, and if whatever I'm gonna study it, and I'm gonna learn what I can do from this side to help him. But I want him to know that I've got his back.
Very good. Well, we're running out of time, but Denise is asking, where can she find a copy of the
Yeah, Compline. Denise, if you'll put your well, this is a good point to just do the stuff for my website and all that. Can I do that now?
Yes. We did actually put that in our flyer, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, the website is my name, Nathan, Nathan -Castle, Castle, nathan-castle.com. And that when you go on the website, in the upper left-hand corner, that little envelope that's an icon to create a new email. Just click on that little icon and send me an email, and I'm very responsive to that. In the upper right, there are the icons for social media, and the one that I'm happiest about right now is YouTube, because my YouTube used to just be a digital dump. It was just a place just to throw any random thing. But during the pandemic, I've had the leisure, and I've hired some help that have organized that well. And not all the things that I do pertain just to this topic about afterlife crossing. Some of them are about, I love to teach the Gospels, and I teach some things on spirituality. She's asking about a prayer called Compline, which is a way in a monastery, it's the last prayer of the night. It's how to dispose, to kind of hand your consciousness to the Holy Spirit as though it were a ball. If you can imagine your consciousness as an object you could hand to a beloved other, that's the last prayer of the night. Handing your consciousness off and saying, please safeguard this till the morning. And if you can use it anyway during the night, it's all yours. So, but there's a particular liturgical forum for it. And Denise, I'll be happy to share it with you if you'll send me an email, or any of the others of you, if you want to do that. I'll be happy to.
I have a question for Denise. Denise, any particular reason that you're asking for that? Because it sounds intriguing. Are you planning to use it in your work in some way?
Well, I've had situations. I'm not a psychic, nor am I a medium, and I've never died, but I have had lucid out-of-body experiences where I'm aware of my body on the bed, and then also going out and speaking to people that have crossed over. Sometime there was one situation where I did have to assist and help a few people that had died tragically crossover, and I prayed and got back into the body, of course, safely. But since this does happen from time to time, I would like to make sure that I have this practice of this prayer before I sleep. And if I could help anybody, fine too.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you and I talk offline too, but if you email me, we can figure it out. I can at least send you kind of an outline of what Compline looks like. And you might find that it has some practices that you already are doing that maybe just have a different way of packaging it.
A couple last questions, Father. So the Catholic Church lets you do this work. They sort of stay out of your hair, presumably. Is that right? Do you have to report back?
So far, so good. I get asked, I was asked one time on a call-in radio show, does the Pope know what you're doing? Well, no, he does not. He does not know my name, and he does not know what I'm doing. Not at least this Pope. Now, ones that have already died, yes, but not this one. No, I'm a Dominican, and I have a vow of obedience to my provincial, and we elect our leaders. There's been two provincials since 2018 when the first book came out. Each one of them has signed off on the goodness of what I'm doing and left it at that. But recently, there was a meeting where my name came up and it didn't go so well. But I've been invited to address that group of people in the future in September and have a face-to-face opportunity for people to be better educated about what I do. And if they feel the need to have an opinion about it, maybe I can, put my best foot forward. In the end, people are going to act as they please, don't you think?
Yes.
I'm
Maybe.
even the question about verifying, I get it, you know, and I can inquire about trying to prove that some of these people actually lived, but there are always going to be people who are never going to be satisfied with enough proof. And so I'm not going to make it my business to chase people down the street, persuading them of what I'm doing. I'm just going to do what I do.
Right, absolutely. And so presumably there are lots of people doing this, because on the other side, there's a catalog of some sort that the
Yes.
individuals can look through.
The first time that I came to IANDS on a panel, it was in Seattle, and I only had 13 minutes, but a lady stayed afterwards to tell me that she did it while she was quilting.
Okay.
That's something about the layers of it. I don't know, I've never quilted, but it has some sort of layers of batting and fabrics and things. And she said while she's quilting, she helps people move from level to level.
Interesting. Now, are you familiar with the Robert Monroe Institute?
Only by reputation. I've not. They're in North Carolina, aren't they?
No, I think they're in South
Virginia?
Virginia. I think
Virginia.
they're
Virginia Beach. Well, no, I'm familiar with them, but I don't really know anybody there yet.
Anybody know very much about the Monroe Institute? Who's chiming in? Well, my recollection is that they have a lot of the different types of tones. The hemisync, I think, is what it's called.
Oh, yeah.
Put these microphones on and get into sort of deep headphones on and get into some deep meditations. And
Yes.
somewhere along the way, I picked up that when you're in these deep states of meditation, sometimes you will encounter souls that don't know that they're actually dead, and sometimes these individuals will actually help them to the light.
Well,
I wanted to bring up
the ones that I help keep coming at the rate of about one a week. So I feel like for the time being, I just keep doing what I'm doing. But I am open to the possibility that it might be timely now to start inquiring about verification, at least in a few instances where somebody might be ready to do that.
Well, if you ever want to come back and talk to us about some of the verification process and how that's bolstered some of your writing and work, we would love to have you back.
I'd be all about that. I'm hoping this summer to start working on the next book, because they kind of write themselves. You know, we've done most of the work already, and so I'm beginning to pray my way toward which of these stories do I think in fact, I'd try not to speak publicly about stories that I've never gotten their permission to do, and I did well today. I didn't disclose anything I didn't intend to, but once in a while I've had to go back to a host and say, please edit out that part. I didn't have their permission to talk about that story. I broke my own rule.
Two final questions, and that is, any children ever come through to you?
Yes.
One
of them is in the book, a young girl that what's her name? You're not dead, you're just bouncy. You remember that one? Any of you read that? Was that familiar? She was in a field of people all who died in falls. Her name is Bridget. She's in book 2. She was only 10 years old when she died. She died in a fall, but she was in a field of people who died in the fall. And she said, they're all so sad because they feel broken and they fell. They all feel like they're on the bottom and they can't get up. And for whatever reason, she was the spokesperson. And she said, I'm not the smartest and I'm not the oldest. If anybody else wants to talk, I'm not trying to force myself to the front, but somebody asked me. And then she went on to say that people were trying to get her to help other people, even adults. She said there'll be adults that are all sad, and there'll be children that are all sad because they miss their parents and the adults miss their kids. And somebody said, would you get the two of them together? Would you tell that adult, there's a little girl over there that needs somebody to talk to? You think you look like you might be just the one. So there was a 10-year-old starting putting Afterlife souls together. And then she came up with this phrase, and she said, remember, people, we don't have the same bodies we used to. We don't have bones that can break, and we don't have blood that can gush out of a hole. You know, so you're really not dead, you're just bouncy. So she thought, we need to teach these people how to fall and have fun doing it, because they all fell and it was tragic. So we need to get them to have fun falling. And she thought of bouncy houses at birthday parties and said how kids love to fall. They just need a safe place to fall. And so she created this kind of playground of things that and she said, some adults, they can be so boring. They go to an amusement park and they don't go on the rides. They just sit on a bench. So I need to get them to go on a ride. And so she's created, you know, those little cars that are in amusement parks that are running on some sort of a track, but it looks like the child is steering it. She said, we got them going and we got them falling again and seeing that they could get back up. They just need to get over the fact that they fell. They can also get back up.
And that might be helping them transition to the other side.
Exactly. That's what it was. And she was a 10-year-old that was coaching other people into getting back up.
And now, very final question. What do you think it is about you that makes you so gifted at this particular kind of work? Why do you think you were chosen to?
Well, I was taught to pray for the people who had died from about the age of 3 or 4. And we used to get a newspaper in the morning and one at night. And both of them had a whole page of pictures of people that had died the day before. And I lived in a place where Catholics were a minority. Most people were Baptists. And we were taught at school that only Catholics believe in purgatory and the Baptists don't. So the Baptists don't pray for their dead because nobody taught them how. And so the poor Baptists that died were having to wait in line while the Catholics zoomed by them because the Catholics got prayed for and the Baptists didn't. And so that was in my little imagination as like a 4 or 5-year-old. So I would, at the bottom, when I learned how to read, at the bottom of the obituary in the South, and when I was growing up, almost everybody went to church and almost all the funerals were at a church, and it said which one. So if there were any that were not Catholic, I'd pray for them. So when I was going to sleep at night, Denise, you were asking about Compline. I was kind of doing Compline as a 5-year-old because my mom taught me, and both of my aunts were Dominican first grade teachers. They were both nuns. And so I was surrounded by all this spiritual input, not just about the rules and regulations, but about spiritual practice. So I was praying for, I imagine that I said in book 1 that I thought purgatory must be like the bank. When you go to the bank, you're going to get your turn, but you have to wait in a zigzaggedy line of ropes. But yeah, I imagine that if I prayed for people, they'd get to cut in the line and I could help them. So in my first book, I said, if I had anything to do with it, purgatory was going to have prompt customer service. So as a little kid, I was making sure that people got into heaven as fast as they could because I was going to make sure that they did. So.
Wow, it sounds as though they're going to keep you busy.
I'm always busy. Yeah, I'm never not busy. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, we've come to the top of the hour, and I just want to say a huge thank you for your wonderful presentation and sharing everything. I did mean about coming back to us sometime in the future for your next book. So please feel free to always contact me.
Sure, maybe we'll have, through IANDS, we'll have some other collaboration to do somewhere along the line. And if any of you can make your way to Salt Lake City, I'll be there. And
September 1st through 4th this year in Salt Lake City, IANDS is having their annual conference. But next year, it's going to be here in Arlington, Virginia. And I am actually going to be looking for a lot of volunteers. And if you volunteer, you can get to attend some or maybe more than some of the sessions for free. So keep that in mind and keep in touch. Okay. Anyway, thank you so very much, Father Nathan.
All right. God bless you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care. Bye-bye. See you next time.